Hey guys, Wix100 here, back with another web design tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to mess with images on your website with CSS. So we will want to open up our index.html, and I have the table collapsed so that it's not taking up a bunch of space on my screen. And under the table, I am going to do img source equals, and then I have a nice bridge picture that is from a stock footage website. It's a nice bridge over the water with trees you can see on the screen. It's actually a pretty cool bridge. And so I'm going to say assets slash pictures slash bridge.jpg because that is where my bridge is stored. In the root folder, then assets, then pictures, then bridge.jpg. I am also going to set its class to be image spelled out as opposed to img because when changing the properties, I want to affect this image. I don't want to affect the images from the footer or the header or in the future any other image that we add. Alternatively, to affect only this image, I can also do id equals image. ID is for that specific item, whereas class can be for all as many items as I put that are for that class, as I did here with the different headings. Let's go to style.css so we can style our image. So I want to do dot image, and then actually before I do that, let's just look at the website. So I have the web page already open. If I hit refresh, you can see I now have two scroll bar, or I now have another scroll bar, because look at how massive this thing is. This is a huge image. In the first take of this video, I did not realize how big this image was going to be when I recorded it. So we want to make it smaller. So let's just change its width to 100%. And with images, if you change only the width or the height, then the other dimension will proportionally adjust with it. So if I hit refresh, there we go. It's now the width of our page and the height has adjusted proportionally. But this is still a huge image, so I'm actually going to scale it down to, let's say, 50% and refresh. And it is still, there we go. Just took a moment to refresh. So now we have a 50% image. It is half the width of the screen. And we can, just like the table, center it, but I'm not going to bother with it because I've already shown you how you can center objects. So let's go with border radiuses. So as you may know, you can have borders on elements. One of the things with a border is you can set the radius for the border, and that is the degree of turn that it uses when going around the corners. So I can do border radius, let's say 10 px, so 10 pixels. And you can do this without a border. It just ends up cropping the image that way. So if I scroll down when it loads, that's hard to tell, but there is rounded there. There are rounded corners on this image now. So let's choose a bigger radius. So let's choose, actually, I thought 10px would be bigger because I'm used to a 1080p screen and I now have a 4K screen. So let's make it 100 px and refresh it. And now you can definitely see the the curve on the corner. But we could also set it to be 50%, and that should be half the distance for the image. And so when you do that, it ends up making an oval, which kind of looks neat with this image because the bridge already makes a circle, although it does kind of bother me that that's off-centered. Another thing you can do is set the opacity to, let's say, 0.5. So you would set the opacity to a number between 0 and 1, a decimal number between 0 and 1, and that represents the percentage of opacity. So if we refresh, it should be darker now because it's at 50% opacity, or 50% translucency over a black-ish background. I'm going to set opacity back to 1 though, because I want to show more filters and I would like you to be able to see the effects on it. The next one we're going to look at is blur. So filter, and we want to do blur with parentheses, just like a function in practically every programming language that I know of, at least. And let's blur by 10 pixels. You can refresh, and it's now very blurry. We can also blur by 100 pixels. And there's even more blur. But if you don't want blur, you can do brightness. And let's make it 100%. Looks normal. So let's make this 200%. So it's now twice as bright as it should be. There you go. Now it's very bright. And we can also make this like 50%. Oh, I thought it disappeared for a moment. There we go. Now it's dark. And that looks a lot like it did with the opacity, but that's just because it's in front of a black background. And so anything in front of a black background, if you make it darker or you make it translucent, it's gonna look the same, or at least very similar. But with the opacity being lowered, if this was in front of like text or a table or something, then you would be able to see through it. Alternatively to brightness, we can also do contrast. Those are usually associated together with image editing. And so let's refresh with the 50% contrast. So it looks desaturated. Or we can do raise the contrast to 200. There you go. Now there's less distinction between the colors because the contrast is up. Then, if you want to also grayscale, and this is also a percentage, so we can go 100% grayscale. That's what most people will probably use because people don't generally go partway to grayscale. It would help if I spelled grayscale with an A. because it's that spelling of grayscale. So there we go. Now it's as most people would refer to it, as a black and white image, but it's grayscale. Uh, Out of curiosity, let's see what 50% grayscale looks like, because I don't think I've really seen images that are part way grayscale. Oh, yeah, it just looks faded a little bit. That's actually an interesting effect that could be used for things. I'm sure it has been used for things. And we know grayscale's cousin, sepia. So let's refresh it to 50% sepia. Looks slightly yellow. Or 100% sepia. Which is very yellow and tan, because that's how sepia looks if you didn't know what sepia was. Took me a while to find out what sepia was. We can also rotate the hue, which, if you don't know, hue is a color wheel, essentially, and it uses degrees. It goes from 0 degrees, usually at red, to 360 degrees, usually at red. And so rotating the hue rotates all the colors around that wheel by whatever degrees you choose. So if you rotated it by 360 degrees, you would get the same image. But if you rotated it by 120 degrees, all the reds would be green, the greens would be red, or all the reds would be green, the greens would be blue, the blues would be red, and everything else would adjust appropriately. So let's do 120 degree, not deg. And so now it looks like the same bridge, but built on an alien planet with cyan colored foliage and blue water and the sky. But if we do 240, all the reds should be blue, the blues should be greens, and the greens should be red. And now we look like we're on an alien planet with green water and sky and pink trees instead. Actually, I would say this looks more fantasy. The other one looks more uh, sci-fi, and the original just looks like Earth. Alternatively, you can do saturation, which is how much color are in things. So if we refresh this with a 7 saturation, it has a lot of saturation. But if we go down to 1, it's just the normal thing. So then 0.5, it should be dimmer. There. It looks kind of like at 50% grayscale, except in this case, 100% or 1 is the normal color, and the 0% saturation would be the absence of color. So there we go. It's kind of like the inverse of grayscale, except I'm sure there are slight differences. We can also invert the color. So let's start with a 100% inversion. So red becomes, yeah, like that. Green becomes magenta, red becomes cyan, blue becomes yellow, black becomes white, obviously. So it's very bright and very odd looking. But let's make it 50%. I am actually curious to what 50% inversion would look like. Actually, that makes sense. because everything would be drawn to the middle a bit. So 50% inversion just being a pure gray circle makes sense. So 25. Very gray. And 75 should be a grayer looking of the invert. Yeah. So it's like the invert one, but not as sharp with the colors. Then, after inversion, let's do opacity again. But this time, it's opacity using the filter property from CSS, not the actual opacity. So opacity is a CSS thing that is a CSS property on most, if not all, of the elements. You can make almost every element be opacity of some way. This is specific for the filter property. So let's do 50%. Since we've already seen opacity before, it won't be very special. It looks a lot like the opacity from before. Well, those are many of the ways that you can apply filters and different effects to your images. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hit the like button down below if you did, and ring the bell and subscribe if you want to get notified whenever I release a video. Check out my Twitter to see all kinds of announcements for all the things I do. Questions, comments, concerns in the comment section. And until next time, bye.